Why take a vacation when you can beercation instead? Explore the world one pint at a time and join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming group tours, like Going Dutch, Beer in the Netherlands, with award-winning Dutch beer and travel writer Tim Skelton. As the author of Beer in the Netherlands and Around Amsterdam in 80 Beers, join Tim April 29th through May 11th, 2023 for 11 beery nights as he explores the sights, history, culture, and beer of this often overlooked beercation destination. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. All About Beer is back, and we're asking for your support to help provide the independent beer media this rich and colorful industry deserves. Visit our website, allaboutbeer.com, where we're frequently posting new content. And please consider throwing us a few bucks at patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We have low-cost memberships for individuals and small and large companies alike. Every dollar goes to help produce new articles and podcasts. I visited the Tampa-St. Pete region at least once a year for most of my life. It's where my family vacationed during spring breaks, and it's where my folks retired. So as I grew up and started getting interested in craft beer, I naturally used my trips to Florida to explore the local Tampa Bay beer scene. I'd sneak away to check out the local bars and liquor stores in search of something interesting. And in the early days, it was pretty bleak. I'd be excited to find Yuengling or Michelob Amber Bock in the local Publix or some crusty, dusty craft beer bottles in some seedy convenience store. It just was it was a thing that it always was very difficult to try to find something that was really good. And then I was excited when I found Ybor City Brewing Company, which is one of the early craft brewers in the area. But progress was slow until it wasn't. Tampa Bay is now one of the country's most exciting beer scenes, representing an eclectic array of producers of everything from classic wheat beers and easy drinking IPAs to monster barrel-aged stouts. So I'm excited this week to sit down with two gentlemen who possess an impressive trove of information and insights into the Tampa Bay beer scene. Sean Nordquist is the executive director of the Florida Brewers Guild, a role he has had since 2017. He is responsible for growing membership, coordinating events, including the excellent annual conference that I attended a few years back, as well as representing breweries and their interests before the state legislature in Tallahassee. But before taking on that role, he was a beer writer. He wrote for Creative Loafing and other publications, and he also helped run Tampa Bay Beer Week. Our other guest, Mark DeNote, is a freelance beer writer and communicator who runs Florida Beer News, a site dedicated to the state's emerging craft breweries, thriving breweries, and the craft beer history of Florida. As an author and a historian, Mark has written 2 books about Florida craft beer: The Great Florida Craft Beer Guide and Tampa Bay Beer, A Heady History. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Now, before we get into kind of the modern era of Tampa Bay's craft beer scene, I want to take a quick step back and appreciate sort of how we got to this place in time. And I think this question is kind of lined up neatly for Mark as the author of A History of Brewing in the Region. Can you walk us through the story of how beer and brewing developed in Tampa Bay?
Sure. So the first brewery actually traces back pretty much almost as back as far as Tampa goes. So the first brewery was developed by Vicente Martinez Ybor, who owns one of the major cigar factories. Actually, Ybor City, Mr. Ybor City is where the name came from. And people would come to work in the cigar factories and the guys would come and move, and they might make enough money to move their families, but by and large, they would live in company housing around Ybor City, and they would sit there with nothing to do. And so Mr. Ybor had the vision to build a brewery so that these guys had someplace to go, someplace to socialize, because the cultures of the region were such that they would drink at home. And so these guys would have a place to go, a place to drink, and beer that would be made by the Ybor Company. And so Mr. Ybor breaks ground on this monumental brewery that still stands today, only it's not a brewery anymore. And the guys would come and they would drink, and it broke ground in 1896, shortly after Mr. Ybor died. So he didn't live to see it come to fruition, but the brewery opened shortly after in February of 1890, I believe it's 1897, and they had a massive party, and that was the largest brewery in the region. And really the city ended around the brewery. And so the brewery was providing, I mean, you see original paintings and you're talking about sand sidewalks and the swamp right around there. I mean, that's how far back Florida in general, Tampa specifically, goes in craft beer. They were making lagers before electricity. They were making lagers before indoor plumbing. And lagers needing that special conditioning. I mean, the brewery spared no expense. They had all kinds of vacuum refrigeration in order to make lagers in the heat of Florida. And so that's when it started. We had a post World War II boom. We had the great die-off in the 60s where Big Beer came and bought everybody and started a brewery in Tampa. Bush Boulevard, still named for them. Then we had a craft resurgence around the late 90s, and we're still still riding kind of the height of that wave right now.
And now, Sean, I know you have watched the Florida craft beer scene, develop slowly and then not so slowly. I know you're also not from the region originally. You're from LA, is that right?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Okay. So, as somebody who sort of came to Florida, as an adult, and someone who has seen the transition of California craft beer, especially Southern California craft beer scene, what was your response when you visited, when you came to Florida and saw its craft beer scene?
So I arrived in St. Pete in 1994, and there wasn't anything here. I actually had been living in Northern California at the time, and I was already. I mean, I was only 23, but I was, I'm giving away my age here, but I was drinking Sierra Nevada, and I was drinking Mendocino, and I was drinking Rogue, and all these great things, and I showed up in Florida, and none of that was available. In fact, you really had to look hard to find anything at all that was, and most of the good stuff you could find was import. But even that was few and far between because of our bottle size laws. So you could find the occasional thing. There were a handful of places around where you could get some good stuff on draft. But really, I mean, it was slim pickings. So then, fast forward, mid 90s, we started to see, with Dunedin and with Tampa Bay Brewing Company, and there was a place also. So in Ybor, which is where Tampa Bay Brewing Company, the original one, was, and also is now in a different spot. But there was a great place there called the Oak Barrel Tavern, and they had a really good selection of mostly German, Austrian, other European good beers, and that would be the place to go and drink liters and all that kind of stuff. When I got into writing, that was probably, I mean, I've been writing my whole life, but writing about beer, I was, it was probably the 2008, 2009. And I was really having to, it was right about the time that Cigar City opened. And I was really having to do a lot of work to find the things to write about that were about local stuff. But boy, did that just take off. It was just one thing after another, and it was like I can't even keep up now.
No, it was definitely a very late blooming scene, and it's one that, for a whole variety of reasons that we can talk about here, from Anheuser-Busch to the distribution laws to the bottle laws, all these different things influenced, and just with, folks coming up from, snowbirds coming in and whatever it might be, it just took forever to develop. But then, as you said, in the last 15 years, it has just exploded. But before we get into that, let's just take a quick step back, and I'll have Mark talk on this one at the beginning. When we talk about Tampa Bay, we're sort of generalizing. We're talking about two distinct cities in Tampa and St. Petersburg. Sort of on a non-beer level, can you sort of talk just a little bit about what are the identities of those two cities, and are they distinct, or do they just wash together?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
And how much time you have, and what sports teams do we want to bring up?
Sure.
Because you can't really. But one of the greatest illustrations of the division of the region are the Tampa Bay Rays. the Tampa Bay Rays built a stadium in St. Petersburg thinking, well, everyone in Tampa Bay will come here because it's just a bridge away. And they didn't realize that that bridge crossing Tampa Bay was the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
And how they are going to the playoffs, and every other team in Major League Baseball has record attendance, and they can't bring people in when they're going to the postseason.
Yeah.
And so that really kind of speaks to me on the level of the separation between Tampa and St. Pete. I live north of Tampa, and I'll tell you, I get down to Tampa all the time. St. Pete, it's a lot rarer that I can get to St. Pete, so I have to kind of pack those trips in, because St. Pete does have a great beer scene and lots of little breweries that are developing. But Tampa really is built around the MacDill Air Force Base originally. That kind of they built from the south up to the north, and there are really five or six counties that call themselves Tampa Bay. So when you're talking Tampa Bay, you're talking about Tampa, you're talking about St. Petersburg, but you're also talking Clearwater, Tarpon Springs, moving north. And so I think the Tampa Bay Beer Week just put out their annual passport that I got in the mail, and there were 81 breweries, and it spread through, I think there are 6 or 7 counties actually in that passport to call that call Tampa Bay home and identify as being in Tampa Bay. St. Pete, Clearwater, more tourist driven, more beaches, more right on the Gulf, more boating, more outdoor lifestyle, more arts community. Tampa, more, I don't want to say industrial, but definitely more of your city life, city mentality, with traffic and crowds, and tourism centered around the Bucks, and a Gasparilla Pirate Festival, and lots more of more traditional tourism, where St. Pete is mostly outdoor beach driven. Clearwater, and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, or throw in there, because I know you live in Pinellas, you live in St. Pete.
Right. Yeah, I'm just, also then, sort of looking to the south, you also really kind of have to include, Manatee County, which is where Bradenton is. If, depending on your definition of Tampa, you could be all the way down into Sarasota.
Yeah.
You could be all the way up into Pasco. So it really, and there's so much going on. And because of the nature of being a coastal area, growth pushes outwards and upwards. So, and then in Pinellas County, which is a peninsula, the only place to go is up. And so when you look at the downtown St. Pete area, and they're building high rises left and right, and leaving a lot of the people who have been here a long time wondering who can afford these things.
Yeah.
Like, there's nobody down here making that kind of money to but I think there's definitely distinct identities, especially if you ask somebody where they're from. Somebody who lives in St. Pete is very unlikely to ever say that they're from Tampa.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And to drive to Tampa is, from where I live, 15 minutes tops, really.
Yeah.
But if somebody says, "Oh, it's over in Tampa," it's like, all the way over there. And realistically, it would take me longer to drive to Dunedin, which is in northern Pinellas County. But I'm more likely to agree to go something in Dunedin than I am in Tampa. Just there's that mental thing about going across the bridge.
Well, let's talk about these two cities and their beer identities. And it does seem that we, by happenstance here, have gotten good representatives from each of the two scenes. Hopefully things will not get too bloody in the next 30 minutes or so, but I appreciate the hometown spirit. No promises here, but we'll start with Mark. How would you characterize the Tampa beer scene in particular?
So the Tampa beer scene is one of my favorite things about Tampa, is that it's definitely matured as a beer scene. Tampa Bay, I always refer to as the beating heart of craft beer in Florida, and that's helpful to lump St. Pete in there. But Tampa Bay, the Tampa proper beer scene, really, Cigar City is the name that everybody knows, is the one that brought renown to Tampa Bay and Tampa proper, winning medals at Great American Beer Festival, and World Beer Cup, and all of the festivals of renown. Cigar City is what gets a lot of people here, and then Angry Chair. When we're known, we have kind of the stout side lockdown with stouts and IPAs, where St. Pete is definitely more experimental and has more mixed culture options, and has some more kind of esoteric beer styles. But the city of Tampa houses some of the larger breweries in the area. and some of the more well-renowned breweries in beer as we go. Like I said, Cigar City, Coppertail, Magnanimous Brewing is growing in size, and the beers that they offer, and just a plethora of them. And I don't want to sit here and laundry list, but it's really, Tampa's really kind of established, whereas St. Pete and the Pinellas side I look at as growing, and there seem to be a lot more emerging breweries, because if you're going to open a small brewery, you don't want to come to where all the big dogs are necessarily and compete with them. And so the Pinellas, the St. Pete side seems to have a little bit more of an emerging beer scene with younger, smaller breweries, much more so than the Tampa side does, I would say.
Sean, what's your take on
I'd say
St. Pete?
I'd say that's right. I think just in the downtown St. Pete area, there's 12 breweries within a couple miles of each other, and they are as different from each other as you can imagine. We've got from the the largest brewery in St. Pete proper is Three Daughters. And then, but just a couple, blocks away, you have one of the smallest, which is If I'd Ruled the World. and, from making, a beach blonde ale, which is about as mainstream a beer as you can possibly make, to a guy making a crunchberry sour, one-off, literally a block away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really you've got the full spectrum of stuff, just even in the downtown St. Pete area, let alone all of Pinellas. And I think you really, I think Mark's got a good idea that there's a lot more experimental and emerging and that kind of thing. If anybody has hit the 10-year mark yet in St. Pete, I'm trying to remember when Green Bench's anniversary is. If they haven't hit it yet, they're close.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember exactly what year they opened. And that's, the only, really sort of old school, still in Pinellas County is Dunedin Brewing, and that's up, of course, in Dunedin.
Yeah. It's really kind of remarkable how young both of the beer scenes are, but especially in St. Pete, especially for the names that they've done so much in just a decade, basically, is my
Mm-hmm.
point. They've built these huge names and really put themselves on the beer map and in the conversation in just an incredibly short period of time. So I'm excited to start talking about, some of these places. Let's start kind of doing a bit of a chronological order before we get into more detail about individual spots. Let's talk about some of the early defining players here in Tampa Bay craft beer, and this is largely talking maybe on the Tampa side, but also with Dunedin. I know that when I would come to visit, it'd be Tampa Bay Brewing Company in Dunedin, and then eventually it was Cigar City. I actually attended the Cigar City launch event at the Oldsmar Tap House way back in the day.
Wow.
And, so I've been at this a while. My history with Tampa is deep, and so I remember seeing Joey there and his whole family, and he was excited, and his business model was he was going to send beer to places like Philadelphia and Boston, because he's like, no one's going to drink this beer here, and I got to send it to the craft beer powerhouses. And I told him, you got to build your local scene. This place has maybe been starved for craft beer for a long time, and and it really is ready for it. And do what you have to do to put money in the bank for the first few months, but eventually, get back here as quickly as you can. And it's amazing how well this scene has developed. So let's talk about some of them. Mark, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the role Tampa Bay Brewing Company has played, and then I'll have Sean talk about Dunedin.
So Tampa Bay Brewing Company started out as a homebrew shop, serving the homebrew community in the mid to late 90s, and that became kind of a hub of, like, many of us got our start in craft beer, just sample bottles, just everything that everybody can bring, and everybody just wanted to have a tasting. And it was a place where the homebrewers would go to get their homebrew supplies, and then they'd stop for a few beers, and then eventually that grew to have a bar. And then that grew to have, and it was all the brainchild of Johnny Doble, who and his brother, who is now the head brewer and the co-owner at Tampa Bay Brewing Company, tells wonderful stories of the old days where they just bought kind of this rat-infested hole and wanted to turn it into a homebrew shop, and they were in their late teens, and they just had a dream. and their parents believed in that dream. And that dream is now 2 locations, a production brewery and a brew pub, and they're cranking out beer to all corners of Florida. Tampa Bay Brewing Company, though, was the hub. It was the place where everybody who was into beer knew that that's where you would go to find out about beer, to taste the latest beer, to go and see what was happening in the very, very young scene. And eventually that grew to, they opened a brew pub, and they had 8 of their own beers, I think 8 or 10 of their own beers on tap at the launch. And that facility is now Cigar City Cider and Mead, since they've moved on to a bigger facility. But they were the story of Tampa Bay Brewing Company and the story of Deneen Brewery kind of move in parallel, where they both had very similar ideas and were built by community, and they didn't have any idea that they wanted to distribute. I mean, they at the time that the laws were what they were, serving beer within those 4 walls and possibly beer to go in the form of a glass growler was about what they were content with, and that's what the law allowed them to do for a very long time. And so that's where now Tampa Bay Brewing Company sits. They're distributed throughout the state. They do have the 2 locations, and they do have very experimental beers to match with the classics. I mean, they were light years ahead of. They did West Coast IPA, and a very hoppy West Coast IPA was their flagship beer called Old Elephant Foot. And it was probably 8 to 10 years ahead of West Coast IPA coming to Florida. So they drank it because they liked it, didn't sell a ton of it, but they liked it, so they kept it going. And those are some of the stories and how Tampa Bay Brewing Company emerged. Now they've got hazies, and now they brew a little bit of everything, but back then they had a kind of a core set that they stuck to, including a barley wine that they had on tap.
Well, I was going to mention the barley wine. That in my early days of craft beer drinking, and in my younger days, when I wasn't calorie counting as much, you get whatever that. I think they would serve you that massive chalice of 18 ounces of chilled glass, oftentimes, and it just barley wine, and that was
Moose killer.
Yes, in a lot of places that might not work, but in the Florida heat, actually that was a perfect beer.
It's very Florida that we serve barley wine in the middle of summer, because we're also so well known for big imperial stouts too, which make no sense for the weather in any time of year here. So, but that's very Florida. I'm a Florida man.
Sean, talk to us about Dunedin and its role and its influence in the craft beer scene and the Gulf Coast there.
Well, I mean, they are their claim to fame is the oldest microbrewery in Florida. And if you want to dig down into the specifics, they're not technically the oldest brewery in Florida, but by licenses, they're a brewery as opposed to a brew pub. So, because there's a couple brew pubs that have been around before, but really they were they were the OG. They were the original one, with Mike Senior, and he was one of the founding members of the guild back in 1997. Him and one of the doubles, I'm sure, probably, I don't know if it was John. It must have been Johnny. And then a few other, Ed Canty and a few other people. But really, they were, and just as Tampa Bay Brewing Company was sort of the hub for everything on the Hillsborough side, including the homebrew. The Dunedin Brewery was the place where everybody in Pinellas County went to have good craft beer. Of course, back then we called it micro brews, but it's also where the homebrewers went, because and same thing, they would bring their beers to sample and share, and they were really the sort of the hub that, I mean, the Dunedin scene. Dunedin's a tiny little place in and of itself, but it has 8 breweries within walking distance of each other. And Dunedin Brewery was what made that possible. They've got literally on the same street in the same block, about 3 or 4 spots down, is another brewery, Woodwright. Across the trail and down a little bit, you have CUNY. Then across, so you've got all these ones really close to each other that can really look to Dunedin Brewery as the the hub for that. And of course, then St. Pete followed years later. But when you talk about not just Tampa Bay beer but Florida beer, Tampa Bay Brewing Company and Dunedin Brewery are the two that really have stood the test of time, and everybody kind of looks back to as the granddaddies of them all.
Mm-hmm. And I'll have you to correct me if this is off, but for me, it really seemed like the next era in Florida, in Gulf Coast, Tampa Bay craft beer was Joey Redner and Cigar City. And you have kind of these OG brewers, Sarasota Brewing Company, other ones who just kind of did the brew pub model that we've seen across the country. But Cigar City and Joey really wanted to do something different. And obviously the Redner family has a very colorful history. Joey is a character in himself, and I've known him and interviewed him, like I said, from the earliest possible days when my dad and his dad would be in the tap room and just talking to each other and saying, yeah, my son had this crazy idea and I decided to give him part of this building, and we'll see what happens, but I think within a couple of years he's going to take over all of this building. And the old man knew what he was talking about.
Enough.
So
Yeah.
So Mark, talk to us about sort of Cigar City, a little bit of its history, the Redners, and how it has helped define Tampa Bay craft beer.
So Cigar City, you really can't talk about Cigar City, or you can't talk about Tampa without talking about Cigar City when you're talking historically, because you're absolutely right, Andy. Joey, and talking to Joey, it's either his humility or his sense of history, but he really didn't get into it to change everything.
No.
He got into it because he didn't want to open a brewery. He wanted to work for the guy who opened a brewery.
Right.
And he'll say that to this day, where his goal was not to be Cigar City. His goal was to find that guy and help that guy.
Yeah.
But nobody was coming along. And so really it was his sense, and his family has been in Tampa and does have a decent amount of money. So they lent him the money to start Cigar City, and he started it up, and they built that brewery on the back of an English brown porter and a 7.5% hoppy IPA, which is hilarious to think of to me. But Highlight IPA, when they first brewed it, it was Wayne Wombles' dream beer. That was his recipe that he thought, if he could make anything, that's what he'd make. And he made a ton of it. And when it started off, it was super tiny. But I mean, I remember I traded beer back when Cigar City was opening, and there wasn't much a growler or Highlight couldn't get you.
Yeah.
I mean,
no kidding.
Sure.
Dark Lord and I mean the stuff that was ungettable, Highlight could get it. And if they wouldn't do it for that, a growler Maduro would seal the deal.
Yeah.
And drinking them now, I mean, Maduro is won so many awards, but it's just the token brown ale. It's the brown ale that's on the tap list that has stood the test of time. And so when Cigar City first opened, on the back of those beers, they were expanding and people came to them. I mean, that was the thing, was that Joey wanted to just grow with draft, but eventually they couldn't grow anymore with draft, so they moved to package, and they found that package had its own issues, but they continued to grow because the demand was there. And it was because it's really a chicken and an egg discussion, right? Where the beer's so great, the people want the beer, which one causes the other, we don't know, but they kind of all pulled together. And then Cigar City continued to grow, and then there was Hunahpu, and when Hunahpu's Imperial Stout came along, Dark Lord Day was happening, Sexual Chocolate Day was happening, and so these big bottle release festivals were happening. And so Hunahpu's Day started as a Friday night in the warehouse, where there was a little bit of music and some tables set up, and you could just come and drink. And it exploded from there. And every year it seemed to get exponentially bigger until it got to a tipping point, and the famous 2014 event happened where they didn't have enough beer and almost shut down Hunahpu's Day. But Hunahpu's Day became part of the DNA of Cigar City, where even the staff of Cigar City got to try new beers with people coming in from all over the world, and that built the reputation of Tampa Bay, which built the reputation of, and ultimately became one of the anchor events in Tampa Bay Beer Week, where you had the Florida Brewers Guild Fest on one Saturday, Hunahpu's Day on the following Saturday. And at one point, I think there was 400 or 500 events that happened between those two marker events at the height of Tampa Bay Beer Week before COVID. And so that's Tampa building its reputation. And then one of the hallmarks of Cigar City that it doesn't get talked about enough is that Joey, as an employer, always gauged his success on how successful his people were. So at one point I have a picture of the staff of Cigar City in like year 3, and by year 5, half of them had gone on to other ventures and started their own breweries or were head brewers somewhere else. And so the growth of Tampa beer really is attributed to the growth of Cigar City, Joey's mindset and their experimental qualities, where they did change everything. I mean, they were a big part of the growler laws being changed and the breweries banding together with the help of the guild, getting those archaic growler laws changed that were able to kind of move the needle further. And so really Cigar City did blaze a trail for lots and lots of folks.
So Sean, I'm sure we could continue talking about the greatness of Joey Redner and Cigar City, but I think we'll probably want to get on to other topics. But one thing I wanted to get onto before we went too far is it's hard to talk about Florida's beer scene without talking about Anheuser-Busch. And it has had a huge impact on the state. And I know you represent the interests of the smaller craft brewers, but can you just talk, just sort of generally about what role has AB played in that state and helping to define? I mean, we've kind of tiptoed around some of these issues with bottle bills and things like that. What is the role of AB in the state of Florida, and how did that impact craft brewers and their development?
Oh, wow. I mean, it's, you go as far back as Prohibition. And when things, after Prohibition was repealed and, breweries started popping up again, AB was a powerhouse in Florida. And then, I mean, you can really look to when, and when we talk about bottle laws, we talk about distribution, we talk about, but and every one of those things you can point to, and this is how AB was involved. And I'm talking about the bottle laws. I mean, one of the amazing pieces of history is, why did we have these bottle laws why did we have these growler bills that seemed to make no sense, seemed to be completely arbitrary, but it came down to, the Florida legislature being so beholden to the AB side of distribution, and Miller came in and wanting to do stuff, and then so actually we're going to go to Georgia instead after being promised a lot, and so the Florida legislature said, okay, we're going to change our bottle size laws to exclude your 7-ounce bottles from being distributed in Florida, which at the time was Miller's big #1 seller, and so it basically gave AB the entire state. Yeah. It said, like, here's this is yours to do with what you want. And so they built on that. They built Busch Garden. They built packaging plants. They built and they had an enormous amount of influence to really write and rewrite distribution law, which we're still mired in, and where distribution contracts are written to protect the distributors as opposed to the brewers. So, I mean, there's a lot that can be said about all of that. And also, all that aside, when you're the only game in town, from top to bottom and left to right, that's all people then know. That's all they, and so for generations, people didn't know that there was other stuff available. Mm-hmm. And we're still in a position where we still have to educate not only the consumers, but the retailers and the distributors and the legislators about what the difference between locally produced craft beer and the big macro producers are. That they don't understand the language, they don't understand the concepts, and so it's so baked into the DNA of Florida that it's even though I would say that their direct influence is diminished considerably, mm-hmm. The legacy of that is still very strong.
We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with the lightning round. Stop living vicariously through other people's social media posts and get out and make some memories of your own. Join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming tours and start exploring the world one pint at a time with us. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. Want more beer for your ears? The new All About Beer podcast, hosted by M. Sauter and Don Tess, takes a deep, engaging dive into the hottest topics in beer. Do you need to know what the heck a cold IPA is? Check out the first episode wherever you get your pods. New episodes drop every other Thursday. And now, back to Beer Travelers. Okay, we're back, and we're now going to start into the rapid fire lightning round. These are just sort of quick questions, off the cuff answers, first things that come to your mind. And we'll start with Mark here. And it's hard for me here with both Tampa and St. Pete to try to decide whether or not we should split them up or not. But I think we're just going to go head to head. We're going to see how, whether or not you guys are willing to, just fight for the hometown team or give some plaudits to those across the bridge. So let's find out. So Mark, let's start. What are the top 3 local breweries for IPAs, hopheads for haze?
Okay. Sorry, Sean. I'm gonna tread on you here. For haze, you gotta start with haze. I gotta start with Magnanimous Brewing that is in Tampa, but from there I have to cross the bridge because I think Green Bench Sunshine City IPA is a personal favorite of mine, and it's not in my grocery store anymore, and I'm pissed about it.
Oh no!
Because well, I live far enough north where anyway,
right.
And then I think one of the uncharted or unsung IPA breweries is Escape Brewing in Trinity, this little brewery that makes a beer called the Other West Coast that is just freaking phenomenal. And I'm a West Coast guy more than a hazy guy, but Green Bench and Magnanimous can definitely compete in the hazy category as well.
I know we got just a quick Green Bench reference earlier, but it's kind of remarkable. If we were to talk about like maybe almost a fourth wave of craft brewers, or a third wave, that's going to be Chris Johnson and what is happening over there. So I imagine we'll get to talk about it a little bit more. But let's ask the same question to you, Sean. I know that you are the grown up among many family members in this may not be the world's easiest gig for you here, but we'll hopefully spread the love around here. What are the 3 top local or what are 3 good local breweries, great local breweries for IPAs in your opinion?
I mean, I have to agree with Mark, and actually both 2 of Mark's I have to agree with, because the Sunshine City is probably one that I have in my fridge more often than any. And the Escape Other West Coast, I don't see it as often as I would like, but anytime I see it on draft, I grab that for sure. So I'll cross the bridge, and I will say that I know technically it's an APA, but Reef Donkey is a from Tampa Bay Brewing Company is a great one. If you're looking for haze, it's hard to go wrong with Magnanimous. We're just gonna pile on the same breweries both sides. Let's see who. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff out there. I would say actually Seventh Son has why am I is it Headbanger? Is that right? Did I get the name right?
Headbanger's the double IPA.
The double IPA is, I mean, that's a really good one too.
Control Freak, the pale ale.
Yes.
Control Freak is awesome too.
Trying to remember all the breweries and all their beer names is becoming more and more challenging as I get older.
Yes. Well, I think it's also a testament to the local beer scene that, there are so many great options.
That's true. That's true.
So now that we're done with IPA, let's head to the more important category of lager. And, Mark, tell me, what are the top 3 brewers for lager?
So sorry, Sean, but I'm gonna take.
We're gonna do it again. I know it.
Yeah, Berry House. I mean, you say lager in Tampa Bay anymore, and Berry House is the first brewery that comes to mind. I had them on my podcast a couple months ago, and first of all, they're just amazing people, as are most in the beer scene, but they're just phenomenal folks. And the brewer's genealogy goes back, I think, 4 or 5 generations in lager brewing, and so he's got. He just released a beer in tribute to his great grandfather that was a lager brewer in Michigan, first generation from the old country. And so Berry House is just absolutely killing it with lagers right now. And then from there, I hate to be a broken record, but Magnanimous also makes amazing lagers. Their Czech Pils is one of my favorites and is in my fridge right now. And then a dark horse for lager that most people don't expect, I find, Angry Chair's Czech Pils is also really, really fantastic. And when they moved into the new facility, one of the big things they put were 4 lagering tanks. So they're not going to increase stout production, which is what they're known for. They're increasing lager production.
Yeah. Sean, how about you? Where do you go for lager?
Well, I mean, I'll start on this side of the bay, but also go back to Green Bench.
Yep.
He has done some incredible stuff with lagers there. There's a reason that they do collabs with Bierstadt. There's breweries that, and they do, but you can't talk about lagers in Tampa Bay without talking about Berry House. They are absolutely killing it with everything that they do over there. Gosh, let's see. I mean, those would probably be if I'm going to pick one from each side of the bay. That's what I'm going to go. Green Bench and Berry House.
Sean, we'll let you get in here and get a chance to go first, so you can scoop Mark. Can't have him taking all this stuff first.
Right.
We're the top 3 breweries for sour or mixed fermentation beer. If somebody wants something a little bit more funky.
Again, we're broken recording here. I mean, it's hard to top.
Eventually, I'm going to start banning these people from this podcast. Having been there, okay. I get it.
Yeah, it's I would say let's see who else. There's a lot of great stuff around.
Green Bench has an entire facility devoted to their sours. So I mean, it's hard
right. So
it's hard not to include them. Yes, I've been there. I get it.
Yeah. I don't know, Mark. What do you think?
This is a tough one because Green Bench was the first on my list as well, and after that, I think Calusa in Sarasota is doing some great mixed ferment and sour stuff.
All the way down to Sarasota. Yeah, that's that's a good call.
And there's just, I mean, we're Floridians and we're known for Florida vices. So I mean, there's a lot of kettle sour going on.
True.
I would say it's going to be controversial, but Arcane is making some great sour beers in Largo. They're not always mixed. They're not always true sours, and they say sometimes they're more of a candy shop than a brewery because of all the lactose and adjuncts that they use. But I think that they hit a lot of the sour stuff, and that's just a tough one.
Sean, when we get into barrel aged beers and stouts, I know there are some solid players here, but who do you recommend for barrel aged beer or stouts?
I'm going to start with something we haven't talked about and actually competes in any of the categories. Corporate Ladder. They're down, and are they technically Ruskin? I can't remember the actual name of the town that they're in.
Palmetto, is it?
Is it so? They're Hillsborough County, right? Or they're right on the line between Hillsborough and
so right over from Bradenton, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
To the east of Bradenton.
Yeah, I mean they've got great beers across the board, but some of the stuff that they've done with barrels have been really fun. What are some other great? I mean, obviously, Cigar City has good stuff across the board too. Coppertail.
Yeah, we haven't talked about Coppertail much yet. Tell me about Coppertail.
I mean, all their beers are great. Right? They've got great lagers, they've got great IPAs, they've got great sours. Their food is great at in their restaurant. So I mean, they're really. I've never had anything from there that wasn't really, really good. I mean, Free Dive is actually another IPA that I would get fairly because its ABV is a little lower. Which so you can have more than one and still be functional. Their lager is really good, and their porter is really good. I know porters don't get enough love, but their Nice Wind porter is really quite tasty.
Mark, how about for you for barrel aged or stout beer?
I'm gonna say that one of the breweries that's doing really, really exciting stuff now is Cycle in St. Pete. He's only brewing, he's got an entire facility devoted to stouts, and he's doing kind of the same thing that Side Project and a lot of the national renowned breweries are doing with beers, barrels, and time, where he's actually going to 2, 3, and I think 4 or 5 years in barrels, and then releasing those and letting people see what's going on with the barrels there. And he's always got, and he was controversial for a while, and he's brewing to meet demand. And so he's actually usually has several batches of barrel aged beer available at the brewery at all times, which is really kind of cool. After that, I'm gonna, you're gonna start, but you are need to start banning some of these and saying we can't say them anymore. I'm gonna go Angry Chair because their barrel program is firing on all cylinders. Their adjunct, they adjunct them just as much. And listening to those guys talk, like when they talked at the guild conference, where they're like, yeah, we've got these great beer and these great barrels, and then we have to figure out what freaking adjuncts, pistachios or walnuts or what are we going to put in them to make them sweeter. So but I mean, their barrel project is kicking ass right now. And then after that, a lot of the breweries that were already mentioned, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to give love to some of the breweries that we haven't mentioned.
Right.
We keep the topics that you talk about. We keep coming back to the.
Well, we can switch gears and do it this way. So you have friends coming in from out of town. Where's the first place you want to take them? And maybe someplace you haven't already. You can't just say Cigar City. We can't talk about places we've named. Where's one place that you think maybe they haven't heard of? They've heard the big names. They're beer people, but where do you want to take them? That is a place that's a little bit special that we maybe haven't talked as much about.
My first one will be Bestet. It's a really small new brewery. They actually opened during COVID. They're just on the border of Ybor City, like across the street from Coppertail, just about, and next to IKEA. Real small. And it's really just a 2-guy shop, and they're making some really great beers. They're making some are something like traditional Egyptian styles. Their whole concept and theme is all ancient Egypt and Egypt mythology. They're sort of just across the board. Their beers are really good. One of my favorites is one that they do actually made with purple yams, and it's this really pretty purple color. It's got a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of tartness to it, and it's like 4% or something like that. It's really it's really nice. So that's a fun new and different place that I would definitely take someone to.
And Mark, how about you? I see you contemplating, pondering, trying to come up with a solution. Trying not to say Cigar City or Green Bench.
I'm gonna say Arcane. I mean, I said them before, but I think that they're worth talking about because they are, as much as they get attention for their hype beers and their sours and their candy beers, but they make malty styles well. They make Scotch. They make a great Scotch ale. They make great. They make a mango habanero Berliner Weiss that's outstanding. That's one of my favorites. They do hoppy well. They do IPAs, double IPAs, hazy IPAs. They do carrot. They also do carrot cake beers and chocolate cake beers. But they do 2-style. Like they make a great Hefeweizen called Hooked on Phenolics. They do.
It's a great name.
Yes, and their names are half the fun, but they do it really well. And they're also, I'm going to cheat and go throw a stone from there and go to Rap Brewing.
That's what I was going to say next. Was Rap.
One of the breweries who helped them in Westbrook helped the resurgence of Goza in the U.S. They were some of the first Goza brewers, and Greg Rapp, rest his soul, founded the brewery, and his family keeps it going. But they make traditional styles and they make some experimental styles very, very well. And actually, the guys from Arcane came from Rapp and trained and brewed there. And so Rapp is very much an unsung hero of the Tampa Bay scene, and they're just not getting bigger. They're just still really small.
Yeah. And then talking about traditional styles, I'll piggyback off that and hop over to Dunedin and talk about Woodwright, which is the one that's just right, not even a stone's throw from Dunedin Brewery. Traditional styles, very small, one of the coolest little tasting rooms you'll ever see, and really good, solid beers across the board, all traditional, German, Austrian, just really, really good stuff.
This has not been necessarily the greatest time for beer bars. All these tap rooms opening up have kind of caused some identity crises among beer bars. But, Mark, if you were to pick one beer bar in the Tampa Bay area to send folks to, where would you select?
The Independent. The Independent in Seminole Heights. She has Saison du Pont on at pretty much all times. And they build a great local, a great Belgian, a great well-rounded tap list. And actually, and I don't know if you'd call him a beer bar anymore because he has a brewery, but Mr. Dunderbox was one of the OGs of the Tampa Bay beer scene, and his tap list, how he gets half the drafts that he does are just unfathomable. So I mean, those are really the two, and you're asking for one, and I've given you two of the last question, so I apologize.
I'll take up.
Sean did it too, though.
And Sean,
my defense.
Sean, how about yourself?
Because I absolutely can't argue with either one of those over on the Hillsborough side. In Pinellas County, in St. Pete, Ale and the Witch. Brett opened up as a craft beer bar. He's got to be 10 years now, or give or take, and is consistently has an incredible tap list.
Great spot.
Live music all the time. Never charges the cover for the live music. His draft is all American craft beer. So it's a great spot. And great ownership. You're just good all the way around. So if you're in St. Pete and want to go to a beer bar, that's the one to go to.
And I know I had a couple other categories for you, but we'll throw one out there. If you're going to go to a cocktail place, Sean, where do you recommend folks go to?
So in St. Pete, I'm going to the Whiskey Exchange. It's a cool place. They've got a cool little gimmick with with the stock ticker, but it actually has the prices of some of the different liquors they've got there that fluctuate up and down based on how people are buying them. It's kind of fun. They do a $5 old fashioned on Tuesdays, but they've got a really incredible whiskey book and bourbon list. Also lots of great of other spirits, rums and tequilas and that kind of stuff. And their cocktails are really, really good. So that's my go-to, at least in St. Pete.
Mark, how about yourself?
I'm gonna say I had one, and I think I'm gonna audible because recently a couple times we've been to Santos Drinkery, which is at the top floor of Casa Santo Stefano, which is owned by the Columbia Restaurant Group, who has the oldest restaurant in Florida, but they built a Sicilian themed restaurant as an homage to the Sicilian people who built Ybor City in that area of Tampa. And on the top floor, while you're waiting for your table, or while you're just having a drink, they have a great cocktail list, and you can get a cigar because you're outdoors. You can get a cigar to go with any of the drinks that they have, and they'll do a beautiful old fashioned with whatever bourbon. And because they are the Columbia, they do get some of the harder to find bourbons. I mean, in Florida, Eagle Rare and some of the higher end Sazerac whiskeys are harder to find anymore. But they usually have them at Santa's Drinkery, and the ambiance looking over Ybor City from the second floor of this restaurant, with the cocktails and the cigars is hard to beat.
Sean, what's a brewery that's flying under the radar that, or maybe doesn't get as much of attention as it should, or deserves a second look?
Well, I already said Bastet. I think that's one of them. That's a good question. I think I'll stick to my county. Pinellas Ale Works in downtown St. Pete is it's not super big, but they consistently make really good beers, all styles, and they're just a small place, around the corner from a lot of the other better known ones, but I think it's one that deserves a little more love.
Mark, how about you?
I start to go up and down the highways and think about the different breweries along the major thoroughfares. I have to throw out, they don't get enough love. Mr. Dunderbox, just the amount of beer and how hard he's pushed the beer scene, and he used to be the only reason to go to University Mall. Was Mr. Dunderbock's beer bar. But then when he opened the brewery, you've never met someone who is harder on himself and harder on a beer and judging beers. And so his Hefeweizen is as true to style as it comes. He makes a sour that's done with the Solera method, that if you're lucky, it might be available. But he's one that definitely is an experience. It's in a German market, and he has the German beer hall feel. and it's just kind of kitschy and eclectic, but his draft list is 35, 40 drafts, something like that. And
Yeah.
there's always a Hefeweizen on. There's always more than a few lagers. There's locals, there's nationals, there's regionals, there's I mean, he is part beer bar, part brewery, and just all the way amazing.
This is a question that has gotten some mixed responses over the last couple months or so, and we'll see if Sean can answer it. I'll ask Mark first. Sean's in a bit of a predicament with his circumstance, but we'll ask it anyways. You think I think one of the valuable things about writing about travel and tourism and things like this is not only talking about places that are doing a really great job, but places that maybe either people should avoid, shouldn't spend time, or really need to kind of step things up. Are there any places, Mark, that you would say have been slacking at all, have been, maybe need to, step things up?
That is a controversial one. I can see how that would be controversial.
Yeah, I get one of two responses. I either get, hell yes, I've got a list of 25 names and I'm going to go through them right now, or I get, whoa, I don't know about this one.
I'll say this, and I think Sean will agree with me, because I think we've had conversations around this. There are breweries that are and 90%, 90% of craft beer is asshole free, right? Or 90, 98, whatever the number was. I think after COVID is more like 90 or 92. But every brewery in the Tampa Bay area are upstanding members of the community, are inclusive, and the ones who don't play well in the sandbox, just because you have big signs everywhere, doesn't mean that you're necessarily part of that overall community. And it's I don't want to name names because I don't like pointing fingers, because I don't feel like I'm necessarily one to judge. But the breweries who are, you could see it in festivals and you can see it everywhere, whenever everybody gets together, the people who are inclusive and inviting, they're all there, and the people who disinclude themselves are the ones that are, it's apparent from the industry, from sitting in at a brewery. It's like, well, why is that a different crowd? Why do those people not hang out at events? Why? And it's because this is the most welcoming beer community I've ever been a part of. I mean, I've lived at different spots and tried to be part of started writing about beer in different spots, and Tampa Bay is just, I call it home, because it is the most inviting, inclusive scene I could imagine. And it's where the people who choose not to be involved in that scene, it's apparent.
That is a very diplomatic answer. It didn't give me any information whatsoever, except to look around for signage.
I award you no points.
It sounds like if I ask around, I'm probably going to be told, which has been my experience there. You talk to folks locally, and they'll be more than happy to tell you what's what. Sean, I would give you a stab at this one, but I'm not sure you want to touch it.
So what I will say, because I agree with Mark, and obviously we're both in situations where we probably one-on-one over a beer might be willing to give you a name or two.
Sure.
What I will say is this: in addressing breweries and any business really, if you find yourself under scrutiny or under people making comments about you or your brand or whatever that are not favorable, before you just retaliate and strike back, stop and think about what it is that's being said. Really look to see if there's merit to what's being said. Peel away any things that might be over the top, and look at the core of what's being said about you and your brand. And if there is merit to that, admit it and address it, because it's not going to go away. What I would say to consumers is, when people say, "Oh, I'm new to the area. What are the breweries I should visit? What are the ones I shouldn't visit? Like what kind of people are they? What kind of businesses do they run?" Look at how they conduct themselves. Look at how they conduct themselves on social media. Look how they conduct themselves in their tap rooms. I would say visit everybody at least once or twice to get a vibe for what. If you don't feel welcome there, that's a problem. You should, and anybody and everybody should be able to walk into any tap room and feel welcome there. I would say the vast majority of the tap rooms are that way, but it's easy for me to say as a straight white guy.
Yeah.
So, I recognize, and I think most people recognize that there's still a lot of work to be done in that arena. Not to venture too far off topic, but I think that it's a place that all the businesses, particularly the breweries, need to look at and see, how can I make my place the most inviting and welcome place to as many people as I possibly can. And even for the most cynical reason of, that's how you get more customers. And that's how you make more money, is by having a broader customer base. But if you're being called out for something, take a look at it and see if there's merit to it. Talk to your friends, talk to saying, this is being said. What do you think about that? And don't just go with, well, I know I'm not that way. I know I'm right. They're just being sensitive, or they're just too whatever. Pay attention to, and again, as consumer, there are lots of breweries that need to work on one aspect or another, and they should look at themselves and figure out what those things are.
So we'll leave on a bit more of a high note here. If folks are coming into town, if you're beer lovers coming in town and want a great meal, where would you recommend going, Sean?
Oh, there's so many good restaurants, and
yes, the problem, you can only name one.
Right, I know.
It's not fair.
Not pulling punches. Wow.
I make the rules. It's not fair. I promise. Yeah.
I'd want to go I want to take them someplace that also has a good beer selection. So I'm not going to go fancy. I'm going to go a place that has great sandwiches and burgers and all that in St. Pete, that also has a great tap list, and it's called the Wheelhouse. And it's got a great tap list of lots and lots of great Florida beers, and their food is really good. Great burgers, great chicken sandwiches, wings, all that kind of stuff. That would be a fun. And I'd also take it to the Cajun Cafe.
Okay,
Mark, your turn.
Look at you going scorched earth, trying to make sure that I don't get Cajun Cafe. No, that's I would. Cajun Cafe is a dear friend, and he's been loved in the beer community, and he serves great beer. But
sure,
if we're going the Tampa side, I'm going to stick to my side, and thank you for not taking my favorite, which is the Stein and Vine in Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
He is, I'm biased. I launched my second book there, but he is a tremendous supporter of craft beer. He has one of the best tap lists, I would say, in the state on any given day. And his food is fantastic. He has a 2-page menu. One page rotates and one page is static. So he posts his menu every day at 11:30 before they open at noon. And that's the menu for the day. And it changes every single day. And his tap list is, when you go in there on a Monday, most Mondays you go in and the bar is entirely brewery reps, because that's where they stop on their route, and that's where they hang out. And it's just phenomenal. The food, the atmosphere, the people, the draft lists, it's the whole package. And the beauty of it is, looking at the outside, his sign, all it says is pub, PUB. That's it. Very unassuming.
Yeah.
And you walk in and you see it's this mecca of craft beer and great food.
Yeah, 100%.
Mark and Sean, I want to thank you both for joining me today. Let's find out, Mark, tell us where people can find you online, or where, promote yourself here.
Okay. I write for Florida Beer News and various other outlets in my freelance career. I just had an article published with craftbeer.com. I write but Florida Beer News is my main outlet. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, but I also have a podcast called the Beerwise Podcast, where I interview brewers and talk to some of the movers and shakers. I'm around the country, but it's funny how most are focused in Tampa Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a homer that way. What can I say? But that's me. And this has been a great time, Andy. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
And Sean, how about yourself? Where can folks find you and the Guild?
So for my personal, I don't do Twitter anymore, but I do have Instagram, Beer for the Daddy. That's my the old handle. Still going strong on Instagram. And on Facebook, you can find me, just look up my name, but also any stuff going on with the Florida Brewers Guild, both on Instagram, Facebook, follow our webpage. And that's going to be all the up-to-date stuff on everything from our festivals to our legislative pushes and everything else like that we've got going on.
Sean, Mark, I will let you guys know when I'm in town next. I can't
Please
wait to
do.
get back there and
Absolutely.
explore the Tampa and St. Pete beer scenes. So much has changed, and it's all good, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here.
Sounds good.
Cheers, Andy. Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks for listening to the Beer Travelers podcast. If you have a suggestion for a town we should visit next, please drop us a line at podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Please give our podcast a review wherever you listen. It really helps folks find out about us. And if you like the episode, tell a friend and post on your socials. Interested in learning more about connecting with an engaged, energetic, and interested audience of curious beer consumers and brewers? We have many different advertising opportunities, including through our podcasts, website, newsletter, and social media channels. For more information, please contact us at podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Stop living vicariously through other people's social media posts and get out and make some memories of your own. Join Pub Culture Beercations for one of our upcoming tours and start exploring the world one pint at a time with us. Visit pubculturebeercations.com for more information. All About Beer is back, and we're asking for your support to help provide the independent beer media this rich and colorful industry deserves. Visit our website, allaboutbeer.com, where we're frequently posting new content. And please consider throwing us a few bucks at patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We have low-cost memberships for individuals and small and large companies alike. Every dollar goes to help produce new articles and podcasts.